Richard Medhurst, was in Iran last week when something dramatic happened. Let's hear a report from him without having to climb through the thorn bushes of hate and prejudice against Iran in the mainstream media. Richard, it was one hell of a time to be in Iran. The president, the foreign minister, killed in a still unexplained helicopter crash, and then the biggest funerals I have ever seen. Tell us your impressions.
Well, thanks for having me on, George. It's great to speak with you again. And you're absolutely right. I wasn't expecting, I mean, in my wildest dreams to be, to receive the news that the president and the foreign minister had both died. I mean, I thought someone was playing a joke or pulling my leg when I heard this. I really thought that they're joking because I'm in the country and I didn't hear any of this. So this is when they were still searching for him. And I was up all night watching the news, flicking between the channels in English and Arabic, trying to understand Farsi. and they were trying to find him for hours and hours. And the reason is because, when you have a high value person or a VIP like the president, you don't turn on the transponders because then everybody can see where you are. So it's a security risk. And that's why, in addition to the rough terrain, they took so long to find them. And very, very, very sad. I mean, it's a loss for everybody. It's not just a loss for the Iranians, it's a loss for the whole world. And when the day of the funeral, we got up at like 6 a.m. because, can you imagine, like the funeral starts at 8 or 9 and we got up at 6 because we knew it's going to be so crowded. And we were in the car and then we couldn't, the road was blocked because there were so many cars, we had to get out and walk on foot. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how packed it was. And in the end, we didn't even go to the main street. We were on a side street, still at the University of Téhéran where this was happening. And nevertheless, it was I mean, jam-packed, we were stuck in there like sardines. You couldn't leave even if you wanted to. And that wasn't even the main streets. So the ones that were parallel and perpendicular to us were even fuller. And I filmed a lot of videos during the prayers, before, when people were milling in. I've never seen anything like this, and I find it bizarre that in England we see nothing wrong, of course, with, state funeral for the Queen or Diana. But when the Iranians have one, we start making fun of them. We start, negating or trying to dispute the figures. I mean, what is this? Who has time for this nonsense? I was there, and I'm telling you, there were millions of people. Okay, you had so many foreign dignitaries who also came to pay their respects. Putin was supposed to come initially, and then he sent the Speaker of the Duma. You had the Vice Chinese Prime Minister, the Azerbaijani, the Armenian prime ministers. You had the Pakistani prime minister as well. These people, you don't see that often. You only see this when someone of value, someone who has done a lot for the world and not just their country, passes away. And right now we don't know what it was. So we're still waiting for the investigation. But yeah, it was a once in a lifetime experience, and unfortunately, a very sad and morose one.
Well, the British coverage said that there were thousands of people at the funeral, although in fact there were at least 5 funerals in different cities.
Yeah.
Because exactly. There were 5 people, I think, died, and also the president's body was, as it were, taken on a cortege through his own hometown, and then also for burial in Tehran itself. Yet they said thousands, though any fool could see by looking at the pictures that it was millions. A problem they solved by not showing you the pictures. And they also claimed that the Iranians were happy to see the back of President Raisi. Do you find any evidence for that?
No. First of all, yes, there were thousands, but there were also hundreds of thousands in addition in total. It wasn't just thousands of people. That's a complete lie. And I find it funny because the BBC wanted to interview me on that day because of what I the footage that I posted, and then we were setting up a time, and then they suddenly have disappeared, which is very telling, because they can't have much truth on the channel, God forbid. So no, this thing about thousands is not true, and also this idea that there were Iranians who were forced to come. I mean, if that's true, the Iranians have the most sophisticated state apparatus in history. But no one was forced to come. They were not forced to come. I mean, I could see that. And in addition, this idea that they were celebrating. I mean, look, I'm sure there were some people celebrating. I don't know how many they were, but I didn't see any, and they certainly weren't in public. So, whenever any president or any politician dies, some people are happy, or especially people who are in the opposition and the Iranian diaspora who are exiled. But I didn't see anything like that. On the contrary, you had people weeping, men and women alike, just sad, sad, sad. And they came out in the scorching sun and stood there for hours and prayed. And, it was very, very beautiful, but also, of course, sad at the same time. It's funny because we always manage to predict the turnout of funerals in advance, and the same thing with elections, right? So we always know in advance in the West that the Syrian elections are fraudulent, and the same thing in Venezuela. And we know that no one is going to come to the funeral of Raisi. It's amazing, right? I'd love to see the crystal balls that they have at the BBC.
Now, what next for Iran? How stable did you find the regime to be? What kind of changes have there been in Iran and might now happen? I mean, who, for example, will be the next president? Have you got any inside track on that?
Well, I'll just start by saying this, because we see another, Western talking point fall apart, because we always say, or we always hear in the media that Iran is a dictatorship, but it's not true. They're having elections in 50 days, less than 50 days. They have their own democratic institutions, but we choose to ignore that, of course. So again, they're going to have elections in less than 50 days. At the moment, I can't say who's a favorite or who isn't a favorite, because they haven't even signed up yet for the election. So I certainly tried asking around and gauging and trying to figure out who is a favorite. But I can tell you, for the foreign minister at least, Dr. Ali Bagheri, he was the deputy foreign minister, and now he's succeeded to the post of acting foreign minister. And I interviewed him in Vienna during the nuclear talks, and he's a very skilled diplomat. And usually you'll have the foreign minister himself who will go and negotiate things like the nuclear deal, but they sent him, even though he was the deputy, which I think is a testament to how skilled he is in international relations. And so what's next for Iran? Well, I'll say this. I think that Iran is going to be even stronger, because every time we've had a loss like this, whether, for example, it's an assassination, and again, I don't know if Raisi was assassinated or not, but the point is that when a great political figure is lost in Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran, the resistance gets stronger. Their resolve is strengthened, and they're even more driven. And everybody in Iran said the same thing. I spoke to a lot of people. I tried to gauge what happened, and I also took into consideration, the past, of course. So they're going to continue supporting the resistance axis. They're going to continue supporting the Palestinians without question. That's something that they've done consistently since 1979. So it's not about to change now. It's just again, it's a terrible loss, because Raisi, he's somebody who took Iran into BRICS. He also worked heavily with Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He went and signed a railway deal with Iraq. Same thing with the Russians. He just a few weeks ago signed $1 billion deal with the Pakistanis. He signed a 25-year economic partnership with China. So, he laid the groundwork for future generations to benefit from this multipolar world that we're transitioning into. And, it takes a very skilled pair to do that. If you're foreign minister, also you're juggling between the United Nations, the IAEA, then of course all these other bilateral and multilateral organizations. It is a very difficult job to be the Iranian president or the Iranian foreign minister, and they handle it with finesse and elegance. And it's a loss for everybody, frankly, it really is. But I've no doubt that they will stay the course, and they will continue in the same way that they always have.
Now, you mentioned the resistance, the Palestinian resistance. I mean, if you're going to measure Netanyahu's success with how he has freed Israeli hostages and defeated the Palestinian resistance factions, you'd have to objectively adjudge it a complete failure, wouldn't you? Because virtually not one single hostage has been freed, and the resistance are this evening landing rockets on Tel Aviv. So undefeated are they. What's your feeling about the rising tide of opposition to Netanyahu in Israel? It's not an opposition, of course, that wants justice for Palestine, but it sure is united in its belief that Netanyahu has failed. Is that how you see it?
Well, you know, I don't like to think in an imperialist manner, but, you know, divide and conquer certainly seems to be at play here. And that's obviously to the advantage of everybody who is against genocide, because if the Israelis are busy arguing with one another, well, that's good for the rest of the planet, because, you know, we don't need the Israelis and their politics. Even a so-called liberal Zionist or a left Zionist is still a Zionist and is still living on stolen land. And you hinted at that. So, you know, I think we're on the same wavelength in regards to that. But with Netanyahu, I mean, he's trying to keep this war going as long as possible because he wants to save face first and foremost. He wants to keep his job. You know, as long as the war is still ongoing and being prosecuted, you can't get rid of him. He has this this wartime cabinet, and everybody who's displeased has to shut up and do what they're told in the end. So he has a grip on power right now that is to his advantage, but he's losing the war. And, you know, when we talk about the Gaza war, we have to remember that we're talking about several fronts. It's not just in Gaza. It's in the West Bank. It's in Syria. It's in Iraq. It's in Yemen and in Lebanon and even Iran. We had Iran firing 300 missiles at the Israelis just last month. So we can't disregard that as something that isn't a front. It absolutely is. And when you are fighting on two fronts, you're in trouble, never mind seven. This is basic, military strategy. So the Israelis are in big trouble, and as are the Americans alongside them. And so, you know, right now they're firing at Tel Aviv. That shows you how much the Israelis have failed. So after 8 months, they've failed to cripple Hamas's infrastructure. They have failed to capture any Hamas leaders. They have failed to destroy Hamas as an organization. They have failed to free any hostages. As a matter of fact, they've killed more hostages than they could hope to free at this point. So they're in minus, basically. It's scandalous. It's really scandalous. And I think if we look at this behavior, how they bomb everyone, including their own people, we understand why there was a massacre on October 7th. There was indeed a massacre, but the massacre was carried out by Israelis, by their helicopters, because they fire indiscriminately, because they are terrorists. And George, before I came on, I heard you talking about the Stern Gang and the Irgun and all these terrorist groups that went on to become the IDF. You know, they haven't changed. They have not changed since 100 years ago. They are still the same terrorists that murdered British soldiers and British civil servants and politicians and put bombs around London. They invented modern terrorism. And the thing is that when you're a terrorist, you have no guarantee that you're going to be good at military strategy. And that's what we're seeing right now. The Israelis claim to have liberated or cleared out areas in the north of Gaza, and then suddenly Hamas are popping up behind them when they've gone south. So we see something similar to the 2006 war in Lebanon, where Hezbollah would just pop out of the ground and take the Israelis. But now this is even more intense because it's been going on for so long. And them firing rockets at Tel Aviv, it just shows you that Hamas have full operational capability. They have been crippled in no manner whatsoever. And they have access to all sorts of ordnances and weaponry. They've got mortars, rocket-propelled grenades. They have IEDs that they're building with duds dropped by the Israelis. They've got machine gun rounds. They've got everything they need to prosecute this war. Whereas the Israelis collapse like a house of cards if the Americans don't give them weapons every 24 hours. So, I guarantee you, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, military colleges and universities will be teaching the guerrilla tactics that were employed by Hamas in this war. Guaranteed.
Richard Medhurst, as always, a pleasure to talk to you and an education too. That's Richard Medhurst, renowned independent journalist and political analyst.